So to go back, they have to have good construction oversight, because the lead, they have to administer the contract on design build. They have to, in a sense, manage all of the consultants that come into that. In the end, they still have responsibility. I'm sorry. So they can. I'm sorry to go back. They can usually assign these responsibilities to the design builder in most cases. And so you can see that there's a very complex construction stage, and then a complex operation stage. So if you're on the board, these would be your responsibilities, or your roles and responsibilities. I mean, you're dealing with the sort of strategic oversight of the project. And by strategic, I mean there's a lot of uncertainties as things go on. And you've got to have a good business mind to think through how you deal with them. You've got senior client contact, you've got to handle dispute resolution, and then you've got to manage the whole equity risk return and dealing with third parties and direct lenders. So it's a fairly important set of skills.
That SPV project board
Yeah.
is not the developer, it's not the special purpose vehicle. It's a public board. So it's I'm looking at the diagram here, it looks like it's a separate deal.
Okay.
But here you have the special purpose vehicle.
Yeah,
We've got a board up here.
that's correct.
Is that board private or public, or?
You would term it to be private
So it's the board of,
of the SPV.
it is the board of.
But it's representing the partners. Because the SPV is the bidding, in a sense. The SPV is, it has the master contract. But now when it goes into the operation phase, there's a governance issue. How do we bring the two partners? You've got your two boxes,
Right.
and they have a legal agreement. But then you say, but as a partnership, we now have to form a board of which we have shared rights and responsibilities. Because the government still retains some risk, private sector. So the board, we call it the SPV project board. In some cases, I would suspect it may be similar with a few additions.
Will you have a public sector member on that
Yeah.
board?
My suspicion would be that you have to remember, like the way we operate at substantial completion, Infrastructure Ontario is essentially out of it. So on the board would be someone from, let's say, Department of Transportation, right? Because if you don't have them working with you on service delivery, they've got to be able to understand the nature of the uncertainty you're facing. If electric cars are starting to really gear up, you've got to say, okay, we need charging stations. So you've got to deal with these. So the board would lay out all the who would be involved in that. Because in a way, the SPV is still a kind of shell, limited. There's no recourse to suing them for anything because they've got no money, they've got no assets.
So this is a governing body that, like the board of directors of the corporation, provides the ethical and stakeholder input.
Yeah, and you could almost say that the SPV becomes kind of the COO, you know what I mean, the chief operating officer. So you've got the board, and yeah. So this is to make sure that the two partners are working together to satisfy all the stakeholders, from the lenders to the users, etc.
Is there a rule of thumb for membership? Is half of them are government people and half of them are private sector? Or
I have
The project that I worked on, which was here in DC, we had the chairman of the board was Marie Johns, who was president of Verizon at the time. So she was really an independent third party and provided kind of a governance, and a resolution method. And then we had representatives from the private side, the public side, and stakeholders as well, because it was a very stakeholder-driven process. So there were a lot of sub-boards in various assorted ways, but this was the overall board that kind of provided the direction for the SPV.
I'm only guessing, but in the case of the hospital I'm involved in, I would suspect that in setting up the governance, that they would have the CEO of the hospital and the COO of the hospital. Because the CEO of the hospital knows all the operational problems, and the CEO of the hospital really understands the bigger picture of that. They may have the chairman of the board, but I have no idea how. It's a good question. I've never been on one of these, but I would suspect again that you're going to look and see what works best, because it's going to be done. Any board is governed by certain principles of setting it up and so forth. So I would assume at this point you're looking outside to see how do I set up a good board. But it is not a public board. It's a board that is overseeing the SPV and the interests of the SPV. Because all of the contracts are signed by the SPV.
So I could be the president of the SPV. You know,
Yes.
I've got the CEO, I'm managing this whole thing. What I'm concerned about is when my salary, is going to be voted on. I'm going to have half the people that will be public officials voting on my bonus or
That's all pre-negotiated by the time you get to this, because this moves into more of the construction and operation phase when this comes into play.
Yeah.
Because the master agreement's going to cover all that, right?
The SPV, I mean, theoretically it may have and it may not have, but I could see that the SPV, the lead in the SPV is paid by Macquarie. Because the SPV is not a company in the traditional sense. So Macquarie is paying someone to make sure that their interests, okay, they are the signer of the master agreements. So I'm going to pay the fee. So I would suspect they don't have paid employees in the SPV. Because really what you're trying to do is create this...
Actually, they do. I mean, the management, day-to-day management has to be done, because the board is a governing body of a corporate or legal entity. And the SPVs are usually limited partnerships, like you mentioned, or the limited liability companies, right? And so, because it is a partnership, at least in the US, if it is a partnership, there's a governance structure that includes management and the board. Doesn't always have a board of advisors, sometimes it does, and sometimes it's a board of directors, right? It's your typical corporate structure that you would use for an LLC or a limited partnership. So it's got all those components, and the rules are usually defined within the LLC or the SPV, but it is a vehicle, it's a legal vehicle, it's got legal standing, it can be sued.
No, nothing to sue. No.
No.
You can't sue it.
Well, in the US, he can be sued.
But you can sue it. It's got no assets.
And it did say it got assets, but he can be sued.
For what?
malpractice.
As
No,
a practical
seriously.
matter, ask a lawyer.
All
be
you
sued.
can do is you can sue it and try and get the money out of the bondholders.
Right.
Because it's got no assets.
There's
you
a
can-
corporate veil, is what you're saying, but that corporate veil can be pierced, and has been known to be pierced. It's
No,
possible.
I don't mean that. The structure, and again, I can't speak for your country, but I can speak in other countries. The whole idea is to as we say, ring fence it.
Bankruptcy remote vehicle.
Yeah,
That's
so
the idea. They can't go
but
bankrupt.
It's got no assets.
They can go bankrupt, yes, but it's got assets, and it can't be sued.
I can't argue.
The assets are the cash flow streams that come into it, right? It's got assets.
They can sue it.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether they get anything out
Yeah.
is, because I don't know what they would sue for when you know that there's no assets in the. So anyway, we'd have to get a lawyer to discuss it. Who's a lawyer?
I'm not gonna ready now.
Chuck's not here.
So the service period starts at substantial completion and it ends at termination. and they're paid monthly through the payment mechanism. So just to highlight the services we designed, we talk about hard and soft. So we have in the hard, we have building systems, we have plant management, utilities, life cycle. Now, none of these people work for the SPV. They work for the contractor. Now, if you get Johnson Controls in, they might have they might sub all of this out. But the important thing why Johnson Controls or Honeywell gets involved is when you're looking at their bid, you're saying, okay, they got a AAA rating. And they're not going to screw up that rating by default. So I know they're going to be here. And that's a big issue, that you want an agreement with people that you know have the, I mean, credit rating becomes very, very important to these firms because their credit rating affects their cost of capital. So on the hard, you get life cycle, property management, environmental management, etc. On the soft, you can have food services, housekeeping, waste removal, security, porter services, parking, logistics, an integrated call center, life safety, linen, information technology, space and conference room management. All of these can be provided by these people. So, Johnson Control may come along and say, okay, we don't want to do this, so we'll get Armark Harrison Lodgings to handle this. We don't actually do linen, so we'll sign an agreement with this. Now, these don't have to be 30-year agreements. These can be, 5-year agreements.